The land was dying. From the porch of his weathered ranch house, Caleb Rourke could see the bones of the desert stretching as far as the horizon dared reach, cracked, sun-baked earth that once grew grass tall enough to hide a horse's knees. The Arizona wind carried the sharp sting of dust and salt, and the sun glared down like a cruel overseer, baking the life out of everything it touched. The cattle pens were quiet, too quiet. The groans and lowing that once filled the air had faded to silence. Caleb leaned against the railing, the wood dry and splintered beneath his calloused hands. His hat shaded his eyes, but the lines of exhaustion still carved deep across his face. 5 months without rain, 5 months of praying to a sky that had forgotten mercy. The well water had turned brackish. The creek had dried to nothing but cracked mud. Every morning, he'd counted the remaining cattle, once 200, now barely 50, and every evening he buried another carcass behind the barn. He whispered. Pa would have known what to do, his voice cracking in the emptiness. But his father's grave lay out behind the barn, marked by a weathered cross and surrounded by weeds that somehow still found a way to grow. Caleb was alone now, just him and the land, both stubborn enough to keep breathing even when everything else had given up. The air shifted suddenly. A noise, faint but clear, echoed from the barn. Caleb straightened, hand reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall beside the door. Coyotes had been bold lately, and drifters even bolder. He moved quietly, boots stirring up small clouds of dust as he approached. The barn door was slightly ajar. Through the thin crack, sunlight sliced across the dim interior, and he saw movement, a shadow shifting among the hay bales. He pushed the door open with his boot. "Who's there?" His voice came out sharp, like the crack of a whip. No answer, just the rustle of straw. He stepped inside, rifle raised, every muscle tensed. Then he saw her, a young woman crouched near the corner, half hidden behind a stack of hay. She froze the moment their eyes met. Her hair, long and black as midnight, was braided down her back and streaked with dust. Her clothes, simple buckskin stitched with faded thread, clung to her slender frame. And on her face, faint but unmistakable, were the painted markings of the Apache. Caleb's breath hitched. She wasn't what he'd expected. Not a thief, not a scavenger, at least not the kind he was used to chasing off. Still, he couldn't take chances. "Don't move," he warned, tightening his grip on the rifle. "You've got 3 seconds to tell me what you're doing in my barn before I toss you out into the sun." Her eyes locked onto his, dark, steady, unafraid. "Your cattle are dying," she said quietly, her voice calm as still water. "You're giving them poisoned water." He blinked, caught off guard. "What did you just say?" She stood slowly, her movements deliberate, cautious. "The well behind your windmill, it's gone bad. I saw your herd by the troughs. The way they stand, the cloud in their eyes. It's not just thirst. The water is tainted." Caleb frowned, lowering the barrel slightly but keeping it trained on her. "And what would you know about that? My people have watched this land longer than yours," she replied evenly. "We know when it changes. The earth shook last spring, remember? It opened a path beneath the rock. Now sulfur and ash bleed into your well. You keep using it, and you'll lose everything you have left." He wanted to argue, but the word stuck in his throat. There had been a small quake that spring. He remembered the tremors, the way the fence posts rattled, the hairline cracks that appeared along the troughs. His father had always warned that bad water could ruin a ranch faster than rustlers or drought. He lowered the rifle another inch. "You talk like you've seen it." "I have," she said simply. "I came down from the ridges this morning. I followed the tracks of your cattle. The water they drink smells wrong." Her gaze didn't waver, and something in her tone carried quiet certainty, the kind you couldn't fake. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Neha," she said. "It means sunlight." "Well, sunlight," he muttered, sliding the rifle down but not quite setting it aside. "If you're lying to me, I'll know." "I don't lie," she said, her expression unchanging. He hesitated, studying her. She looked thin, tired. Probably hadn't eaten properly in days. Her skin bore faint scratches from travel, and yet her stance was proud, like she refused to bend even under the desert's weight. Something about that struck him deep. "Fine," he said, "show me." By midday, they stood by the well. The windmill groaned overhead as it turned slowly, pumping out cloudy water that smelled faintly of rotten eggs. Caleb dipped a hand into the trough and lifted it to his nose. The stench made him recoil. Neha crouched down beside him, running her fingers through the water. "Smell of death," she murmured. "The earth below is bleeding." She led him out past the dying mesquite trees, beyond the edge of his property, to a dry ravine. The sand shifted beneath her feet as she stopped beside a cluster of red rocks. "Here," she said, pressing a hand to the ground. "Listen." Caleb frowned, crouching beside her. At first he heard nothing but the whisper of the wind. Then faintly, a trickle, the soft gurgle of underground water. She picked up a stick, drove it into the sand, and waited. A few moments later, the ground darkened. Moisture. Real, clean moisture. Caleb's heart kicked. "I'll be damned." She smiled faintly. "Not if you move fast. Dig here. The spring runs shallow." They worked until the sun fell low, their hands blistered, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. Finally, water burst through the sand, a clear, shimmering pool that reflected the pink light of dusk. Caleb stared at it like it was a miracle. His herd, weak and skeletal, followed his call, noses quivering as they found the stream. For the first time in weeks, they drank until their sides swelled. By nightfall, the cattle were calm. The air felt softer somehow, cooler. Caleb built a small fire near the new stream. Neha sat across from him, mending a tear in her sleeve with quiet precision. He studied her in the firelight. She was young, but her eyes carried a weight far older than her years, eyes that had seen too much loss. "Why'd you help me?" he asked finally. She paused her stitching. "Because I know what it feels like to watch everything die around you," she said softly. "To pray for help that never comes." He nodded slowly, his chest tightening. "You've lost people, all of them," she whispered. "My father fought when the soldiers came last winter. They took our camp, our horses. My mother didn't survive the cold." Caleb looked into the fire, guilt coiling in his gut. He'd never raised a hand against her people, but he'd stood guard once on the trail that carved through their land. He'd told himself it was just duty, but now, looking at her, he wasn't sure if duty was ever that simple. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "I'll leave at dawn. You won't have to see me again." He shook his head. "No, you stay. You earned your rest here." Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. "You saved my herd, my ranch," he said, voice low and steady. "I don't forget debts." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Just for a night." They sat in silence as the fire crackled. Coyotes howled in the distance, in the desert. Stars burned bright overhead. Caleb found himself watching the way the light danced across her face, the faint curve of a smile she didn't quite let herself show. He didn't understand her, not yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Something had shifted deep inside him that night. And as the first cool wind swept over the land, carrying the scent of fresh water and the promise of survival, Caleb Rourke, for the first time in months, felt something he thought he'd forgotten how to feel. Hope. When the morning sun broke over the horizon, the world seemed to breathe again. The faint mist rising from the new spring shimmered in golden light, and for the first time in months, Caleb woke to the sound of life returning to the ranch. Birds sang from the cottonwoods, and the cattle moved lazily in the pasture, their bellies full, their lowing soft and steady. He leaned against the corral post, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the herd with quiet disbelief. Neha emerged from the barn, her long braids swinging down her back, her eyes half-lidded with sleep. She had borrowed one of his old flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled to her elbows, the fabric hanging loose around her shoulders. She looked both out of place and perfectly at home. Caleb caught himself watching her a little too long before clearing his throat and turning away. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Ain't much, but it's hot." She took it carefully, sniffing it before sipping. Her lips curled slightly. "Bitter." He chuckled. "That's how you know it's real." For a while, they just stood there, sipping coffee and listening to the land wake up. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it felt earned, like they'd both survived something the world had thrown just to break them. After a few minutes, Caleb said quietly, "You got family around here?" Her face hardened. "Not anymore." She set her cup down, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Soldiers came last winter. They said our camp was too close to the mining road. They burned our homes. My father fought. He didn't come back." Caleb lowered his eyes. He'd heard stories like that before, and though he'd never raised his rifle in those fights, he'd worn the same boots as the men who did. Guilt twisted in his chest, though it was the kind of guilt that didn't have words, only silence. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Neha gave a short nod, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology. "You don't have to be. You didn't do it." "Maybe not," he murmured, "but I stood by while others did." Her gaze softened then, and she studied him for a long moment. You're not the first man to carry ghosts, she said. Just don't feed them forever. The words struck him deep. Caleb had spent years building fences, patching roofs, and mending broken gates, but nothing he'd ever fixed felt as heavy as the pieces of himself he'd tried to hold together since his father's death. They worked side by side that day, repairing the fences and cleaning out the water troughs. Neha moved with quiet efficiency, her hands sure and practiced. She showed him how to pack herbs around the wounds of his cattle, how to use sage and yucca to draw out infection. In return, he taught her how to tighten a saddle girth properly, how to calm a spooked horse, and how to swing a rope with enough precision to catch a calf without bruising it. In the heat of the afternoon, they stopped beneath the shade of a half-dead cottonwood. Neha pulled out a small pouch from her belt, dried berries and something sweet-smelling wrapped in corn husk. She offered him one. He bit into it, and his eyes widened. "What is that?" "Mesquite cake," she said with a faint smile. "Sweet, isn't it?" "Sweet," he laughed. "It's better than any pie I've had in months." That made her laugh, a soft, genuine sound that startled him with how warm it felt. Caleb hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd heard laughter on his ranch. It filled the dry air like rain. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, they sat by the fire once again. The herd grazed peacefully in the distance. Caleb watched the flames dance in Neha's eyes, reflecting light and shadow like something alive. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," he said quietly. She looked up, her face unreadable. "You don't owe me." He shook his head. "You saved my herd, my ranch. You gave me back hope I'd buried months ago." Her gaze lingered on him. "Gold can't feed a soul," she said softly. "And I didn't come here for thanks." He frowned slightly. "Then why?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Because helping you meant helping the land. It's all connected. If your cattle live, the grass grows again. If the grass grows, the river feeds the valley. The land doesn't belong to one man, it belongs to everyone willing to protect it." Her words settled over him like a gentle weight. He'd spent his life believing the ranch was his inheritance, something to defend and control. But now, for the first time, he saw it differently, not as a possession, but as a living thing, fragile and sacred. That night, as the stars came out, Neha sang quietly in her language, a low, rhythmic song that drifted like smoke through the desert air. Caleb listened from a few feet away, the firelight flickering between them. The melody was strange and beautiful, full of sorrow and strength. When she stopped, he found his throat tight. "What's it mean?" he asked. "It's a prayer," she said. "For the land to heal. For the hearts that walk it to do the same." He didn't speak again after that. There was nothing to add. But peace never stayed long in the west. 2 mornings later, as Caleb was fixing a fence post, a distant dust cloud rose on the eastern trail. He shaded his eyes, heart tightening when he saw riders, 5 of them, heading straight toward the ranch. At their front rode Clint Hever, a man with a mean streak as wide as the river and a hatred for anything he didn't understand. Caleb muttered a curse under his breath. The riders slowed as they neared, the hooves of their horses kicking up dry dirt. Clint swung off his horse, boots crunching against the ground. "Well, I'll be," he said, looking around. "Didn't think I'd find you playin' host to an Apache on your land, Rourke." Caleb stood tall, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You heard wrong, Clint. She ain't no threat." Clint spat into the dirt. "No threat, you know what her kind's done. They burned a ranch 10 miles north just last year. You gonna tell me this one's different?" Neha stepped out from behind the corral, her chin high, eyes steady. "I took nothing from you," she said firmly. "I came to help." Clint sneered. "Help? Only thing you people help with is talkin' what ain't yours." Caleb's temper flared. He stepped between them, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "That's enough. You come here lookin' for a fight, Clint, you're standin' in the right place. But you won't leave it standing." The other men shifted uneasily in their saddles. Clint's jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered with doubt. He wasn't expecting Caleb to stand his ground. "This land's mine," Caleb said, "and anyone who steps on it uninvited won't leave easy." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Clint gave a bitter laugh and swung back into his saddle. "You'll regret this, Rourke. She'll bring you ruin." As they rode off, the dust from their horses lingered in the air like a warning. Neha looked at Caleb. "They'll be back, I know," he said quietly. "But I'll be ready." She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you deserve to be safe. Because this land's yours as much as mine." Her expression softened, and for the first time, she reached out and placed her hand over his. The simple touch sent a warmth through him that no fire could match. When Clint returned at dawn 3 days later, with 5 armed men, Caleb and Neha were waiting. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the corral, rifles in hand, eyes unflinching. The first shot cracked through the morning silence, but they didn't falter. They fought with precision and courage, driving the attackers back until the dust swallowed them whole. When the last echo faded, Caleb dropped to his knees, chest heaving. Neha knelt beside him, blood smeared across her arm but her eyes bright with defiance. "You risked your life," she whispered. "So did you," he said, reaching for her hand. "You saved my ranch, Neha, now I owe you more than gold." She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled softly. "Then give me something no one else can." He frowned. "What's that?" "Peace," she said simply. "For your heart, for mine, for the land we share." And as the sun rose over the red desert, casting light on the battered but unbroken ranch, Caleb understood her completely. Some debts weren't meant to be paid in coin, they were meant to be honored in love, in understanding, and in the promise that old enemies could become something far greater.